Welcome to PseudoPod, the weekly horror podcast. We will show you fear in a handful of syllables. Go forward at your own risk.
PseudoPod, episode 803 for March 25th, 2022. Them at number 74, by Linz McLeod. Hey everyone, hope you're all doing okay. I'm Kat, assistant editor at PseudoPod, your host for this week, and I'm excited to tell you that for this episode, we have a PseudoPod original. Them at number 74, by Linz McLeod. Your author this week is Linz McLeod. Linz is a queer, working-class Scottish writer who dabbles in the surreal. Her prose has been published by or is forthcoming in Catapult, Hobart, Flash Fiction Online, and more. She is a member of the SFWA, a rogue mentor, and is represented by Headwater Literary Management. Find her on Twitter at Linz McLeod. Your reader this week is Catherine Inskip. Catherine teaches astrophysics for a living and spends her infrequent spare time populating the universe with worlds of her own. She is a mother to 2 boys and enjoys chaos, water fights, tree climbing, and thwarting plans for world domination. Catherine is addicted to chocolate and Japanese logic puzzles, narrates for a variety of podcasts, and wishes she started slush reading decades ago. You can find her stories at Cast of Wonders, and also at the Dunes Teeth and Lunar Station Quarterly, although you might need a functional time machine for some. Follow her on Twitter at ChesneyCat. And now, as it's nearly Mothering Sunday in the UK, we have a story for you about someone who is a mother. But, as it's us, she's not entirely what you might expect. You'll see. Anyway, we have a story for you, and we promise you, it's true.
Them at number 74, by Linz McLeod. Narrated by Catherine Inskip. When body number 4 is discovered, Mrs. Patterson thinks that surely now she and her husband will be caught. Days creep past, then a week. 2, 3. Their excitement and relief begins to fade. Once again the desire blossoms, delicate at first, but growing bolder as the hours and days pass. Over a dinner of chips, peas and gammon steaks, Mrs. Patterson ventures a suggestion that perhaps it's time they do another. Her husband chews for a moment, points out that there's another James Bond marathon on this weekend they won't want to miss. She cedes the point. Seeing her disappointment, he suggests he can't rule out the possibility they might kill again sooner if someone suitable pops up. Play it by ear, he says. Pass the salt, please. On Thursday afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Patterson have resigned themselves to an early evening. They're driving towards Aldi to pick up breakfast items. Soft white bread, margarine, sausages and eggs. Tonight they weren't planning to do more than order a Chinese takeaway and have a glass of red wine while watching Gogglebox. As their car passes the petrol station, Mrs. Patterson glimpses dark hair, wild, untamed, unparted, as if Moses had never even heard of the sea, and something snaps. She pats her husband's arm, and he swerves instantly, parking on the other side of the road. Mrs. Patterson points at the young woman striding into the station. They wait until she emerges again, tucking the collar of her faded denim jacket up against the wind, and slides back into her blue Kia. They follow her in the car for a couple of miles, staying a respectable distance behind. The Kia shudders into the driveway of a semi-detached house. The young woman carries a tattered, bulging shopping bag from the boot into the house. She reuses plastic bags. That's good for the environment. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson are religious about the reuse of plastic bags. They cruise along the street, peering out at the house. Only one car in the driveway, No toys in the garden. An absence of children. The grass is a little overgrown with a few weeds swaying in the wind. An absence of husband. They park at the end of the terrace and pretend to study a paper map. Mrs. Patterson points out that the house is the last one on the end of a terrace, which provides easier access from the road, as well as reducing the amount of potential witnesses who might hear a struggle. Mr. Patterson notes the lack of security cameras or neighbourhood watch signs. He drums his fingers on the steering wheel. Looking good. Can't be too careful, though, he says, and Mrs. Patterson agrees. After making a mental note of the house's location, they return home. They consult the map again. Flimsy, thin paper, easily destroyed should they ever need to dispose of such a thing quickly, to determine whether or not the house is too close to their own home. It's close, cutting it very fine, but Mr. Patterson thinks it will be suitable. Mrs. Patterson is more cautious. She was the one who spotted the young woman, and while she's keen to bond with her husband again, she's reluctant to dabble with danger. They decide to mull it over. Mr. Patterson places an order with the local Chinese restaurant over the phone, and while they're waiting for it to arrive, they switch the TV over to Countdown. A consonant please, Rachel, Mrs. Patterson mouths along with contestant A, and frowns when contestant A requests a fourth vowel. Far too many. 3's all you need. Mr. Patterson concurs. 4 is greedy, over-egging the pudding. Subsequently, contestant A overreaches and is soundly beaten by contestant B. When it's time for the numbers game, Mrs. Patterson stares vacantly into space and tries to picture what the young woman's home decor looks like, while Mr. Patterson solves the game out loud and gets within 1 digit of the correct answer. When the host shows her working on the whiteboard, he sighs and berates himself for missing a trick. Mrs. Patterson consoles him. They peck on the lips. The takeaway arrives moments later. On Friday night, clad in dark clothes, they slip out of the back door and under the loose piece of fence. The hills between their village and the slightly larger town are pockmarked with warrens. They move at a steady pace, smothered in starlight. It takes them just under an hour to get to the house. Mrs. Patterson uses a small lock-picking kit, an excellent bargain from a local charity shop, to unlock the back door. They sidle inside, checking each room carefully before entering. On the ground floor, the lights are off. A cursory examination of the living room proves there are no toys littering the carpet, nor any chew sticks or bones. The shoe rack by the front door contains only 1 size of shoe. The jackets hanging on the pegs are feminine. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson watch a lot of crime shows, and they have learned several important lessons. Do not check out the crime scene beforehand. Do not return to it afterwards for any reason. Get in quickly and get out quicker. Do not photograph or otherwise film the house or victim. Leave your mobile phone at home, lest the police use location data to track you. The young woman is upstairs. Footsteps creak on the landing. As soft slipper treads can be heard on the stairs, Mr. Patterson offers Mrs. Patterson the opportunity to strike first. She declines. She did the last one. Fair is fair. They stand either side of the kitchen door. The young woman makes it precisely 1 step inside before Mr. Patterson stabs her. After the knife slides in and out again, the young woman judders a couple of times, collapses face down onto the floor, and stills. A faint bubbling, probably a collapsing lung. Red tinging her lips. Not much fanfare, but then again, they aren't dramatic people. Mrs. Patterson wouldn't say they're professionals. Not at all. Very amateur, in fact, although she admits that they're both keen enough to improve. But after the 5th time, something shining and golden emanates from both of them as they stand over the body of the young woman. Glancing around, Mr. Patterson remarks on how clean the grouting is between the kitchen tiles. Mrs. Patterson agrees and adds that the skirting boards are likewise free from dust and grime. Kept a nice house, so she did. They stare down at the body and hold hands like they did when they were courting, tightly, with coiled, anticipatory energy. They're back home in just enough time for a rerun of Pointless. On Saturday they do some gardening. Mrs. Patterson loves her hanging baskets. When the storm comes, the rain pelts the flowers, knocking petals and leaves to the ground with casual cruelty. Mrs. Patterson watches, tears brimming in her eyes, until Mr. Patterson braves the wind, fleece pulled over his head, and slides the babies under the patio table to shelter them. Dinner is a shop-bought lasagna and garlic bread. Dessert is fruit, because Mrs. Patterson thinks her favourite jeans are getting a bit tight around the waist again. Mr. Patterson, whose expanding and contracting stomach is rarely a source of consternation for him, dutifully agrees to commit to a diet in solidarity. Television is good on a Saturday night. They watch all their favourite shows and in between relive the memories of the previous night. They compare the kill to the others in minute detail. Mrs. Patterson's favourite was the second, because she felt that the first one was a bit of a faff, especially when the victim wriggled out of Mr. Patterson's grip and almost escaped. Mr. Patterson agrees that the second kill was cleaner than the first, but admits that the fourth kill was his favourite. Why is that? Mrs. Patterson wants to know. Because it was the first time you smiled afterwards, he says. She rolls her eyes. Oh, you're an old romantic. You know you love it, he says. On Sunday, their son comes for dinner with his fiancée. Mrs. Patterson cooks a beautiful roast chicken and juliennes carrots while Mr. Patterson ably handles the creamy mashed potatoes and makes the same old jokes about lumpy gravy. During dinner, the fiancée compliments the food, the house. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson like her immensely. The conversation switches to celebrities. Their son makes a reference to the time a high-profile comedian cheated on his high-profile actress wife. For a long moment, the only sound is the scrape and clink of cutlery. The fiancée doesn't notice. Later, when the son and his fiancée leave, Mrs. Patterson does not bring up this moment. Instead, she puts on the kettle and busies herself with wiping the countertops. Mr. Patterson assumes it's best left alone. He pours milk into the mugs, then dries the dishes while the tea brews. They hold hands on the sofa, watching a chat show host interview an actress about an upcoming science fiction film they'll never see. Afterwards, they watch the first 20 minutes of a film, before realising they are too tired to continue. They brush their teeth together, recounting the evening's events. The conversation leads, as it frequently does, into a brief discussion of the son's previous girlfriends. As always, they decide that some were more tolerable than others, but the fiancée is easily the best, prettiest, kindest, most well-suited one. Their son seems very happy. This pleases them. The decision soothes them with its familiarity. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson kiss goodnight and go to bed in separate rooms. He snores, she has restless legs, and they firmly believe that one of the keys to a successful marriage is a good night's sleep. On Monday, Mr. Patterson plays squash with ex-colleagues. Mrs. Patterson has lunch with two long-standing friends, then spends an hour swimming the calories off in the local pool. At home, they have a coffee and catch up on the events of the day. Dinner is leftover roast chicken and chips. Dessert is clementines, which Mr. Patterson peels and divides into segments, eaten during the chase. By the time Who Wants to Be a Millionaire is on, they're ready for another coffee. Mr. Patterson answers several questions incorrectly in order to make Mrs. Patterson laugh. They retire to bed, pleased with their productivity. On Tuesday, their daughter phones for her usual weekly chat and inquires after their security measures. Mr. Patterson assures her that they lock the doors carefully every night and have an alarm system. Their daughter mentions the recent murders. Mrs. Patterson repeats her carefully rehearsed lines about the victims. All different genders, sexualities and races. No known links between them. The daughter persists, but as soon as Mrs. Patterson begins to quote the Sun newspaper, she changes the subject by habit, as they knew she would. They finish up the phone call with cheery goodbyes, safe in the knowledge that they are the last people in the world who would be suspected of such crimes. They were witnesses at their gay neighbours' civil union over a decade prior. They frequently lend a hand in the biannual village fair, although they do prefer to keep to themselves. They're frequently seen on the nearby hills walking Mrs. Patterson's sister's beautiful Alsatian. Mrs. Patterson would like to have a dog, but Mr. Patterson has pointed out that a dog restricts your freedom. Mrs. Patterson likes to feel free while staying firmly in her comfort zone. So the dog is off the table, for now. On Wednesday, they drive out to the shopping centre and have tea and scones before browsing the clothing stores. Mrs. Patterson wonders how they ever got so much done before they retired. Mr. Patterson reiterates the point, detailing how every day seems so full of activity. She does not mind that he remakes her points as if they were his own. Conversely, she feels rather important that by producing a baseline, she can encourage him to embellish, to make something bolder and more exuberant. She likes being his foundation, and she is happy to believe she is more of a backstage person. Several years ago, when their marriage had been rocky, other people had plenty of suggestions. Counselling, couples retreats, all that new age mumbo-jumbo. After weeks of talking it over, they decided all they needed was a fresh start. A proper clean slate. A new shared hobby. They'd been watching a BBC box set, some Danish crime drama, which Mr. Patterson wasn't particularly keen on because of the subtitles, when the idea had struck both of them at the same time. An exchange which at any time might have been superfluous and easily forgotten had caused a sudden spark of interest. At first, simply talking about the plan had been enough to bring them closer together. Yet they'd craved more. More intimacy. More physicality. Past middle-aged, they wanted to create memories, experiences, adventures beyond frequent holidays to the Spanish and Portuguese islands. The first victim had almost been their last, but things had worked out perfectly. No one was any the wiser, and the marriage was stronger than ever. As the rain drums a blues rhythm against the conservatory windows, Mrs. Patterson thinks that, all in all, it was really rather perfect. On Thursday, Mrs. Patterson goes to the post office to pay their bills. In the queue, she listens to two elderly women discussing the murders. "They'll catch him," one says, "no doubt in my mind. They all get caught in the end." Mrs. Patterson busies herself by admiring the range of holiday and occasion greeting cards and selects a couple of suitable options to keep in the stash at home, in case she has forgotten to pop any upcoming birthdays or anniversaries in the diary. She wonders why people always assume a murderer is a man, and why they think he has to be working alone. She and Mr. Patterson are different. They're a team, she thinks, and is comforted by the idea. When she returns, Mr. Patterson makes tea and ham sandwiches. Afterwards, they each have 2 chocolate digestive biscuits and discuss how long they should wait before killing again. He thinks it might be sensible to strike immediately, but hide this body in a more secure location than the last. He suggests a local wooded area. Mrs. Patterson blinks, puzzled. She points out that they hid body number 4 there and it was found far too quickly. He stares down at the map and hesitates before stabbing a spot with a thick finger. There. It's a fine suggestion. Mrs. Patterson puts the kettle on again. The next couple of weeks are quiet. Another storm wrecks the flower beds and baskets, so they make several trips to the garden centre to replace the ruined ones. Mr. Patterson drives past the usual turn without indicating. Mrs. Patterson nudges him, wondering if he'd been so enthralled with the latest chart topper on the radio that he'd failed to notice. He double takes, turns at the next roundabout and swings back onto the correct road. It's not the first time he's done this over the last few years, but it's the first time he's got lost on a road they travel weekly. Mrs. Patterson questions him, but he insists he's fine, simply a little tired. She ceases her questions when his tone takes on an ugly edge. A scarlet streak adorns his cheekbones. His eyes stay firmly on the road. Driving back from their favourite restaurant 2 towns over, Mr. Patterson takes a winding back road that Mrs. Patterson is unfamiliar with. She shifts in her seat, wondering why he didn't stick to the well-lit and peopled main road. For the first time, the awareness of the items packed neatly in their trunk, black bags, shovels, 1 large sterilised knife, hand sanitizer, spare towel, rings an uncomfortable warning. She'd chosen and purchased each of them, yet she'd never quite comprehended the enormity of their presence. The road is lined with unclothed trees, branches shivering in the darkness. She slides cold fingers onto Mr. Patterson's knee and is relieved to see him glance over, smiling, as if the thought had never crossed his mind. She's heard of partners turning on each other, of course. It happens all the time on television. Not to them, though. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson are different. A true team, tried and tested. She gives him an extra kiss before bed, just to be sure. On a windy Monday, Mr. Patterson asks her twice where the jam is kept. He's baffled when she gently suggests that there might be something wrong, and angry once he realises what she's getting at. He doesn't need a doctor. He's still in the prime of life. In their usual supermarket, he checks each aisle's title. Chilled meats, frozen meats, home goods, before committing to perusing the shelves. Mrs. Patterson notices this new habit, but has the sense not to address it immediately. The following week, during a news broadcast of their latest victim, Mrs. Patterson peeks around the kitchen door and watches him search through the cupboards again for the jam. Takes him 4 cupboards before he locates the jar, by which time his bushy eyebrows are kissing in confusion. Lying in bed alone, listening to the silence of the house, Mrs. Patterson considers the possibilities. Racking her brain, she's certain the jars have been kept in the same cupboard since time immemorial. The jam is, therefore, indicative of a larger problem. Mrs. Patterson rarely puts her foot down about anything, so it comes as a shock to Mr. Patterson when he realises she isn't going to budge. Tears are the final nail in the coffin. He presses her close to his chest and kisses the top of her head. He agrees to see a doctor. Mr. Patterson is given a thorough examination and booked in for an MRI, which he finds oppressive and strange. Afterwards, the doctor talks them through the results of the scan. Defiant, Mr. Patterson argues that he feels fine. This can't really be all that bad. The doctor has seen more than her fair share of elderly patients. She remains calm and patient. The news begins to sink in. At home again, in the place where they feel most comfortable, Mr. and Mrs. Patterson hold hands on the couch. Television has been turned off. Alexa is silent. The only sound is their own breathing, mirrored by the wind outside like the heaving breath of a dying god. Mr. Patterson suggests another outing to cheer them up. Mrs. Patterson agrees and excuses herself to the bathroom before they begin to draw up plans. Life has once again changed shape under her hands. She does not allow herself to cry. Not yet. She flushes the toilet to make the visit seem realistic and splashes her face with cold water. She must adapt to a new challenge. Teamwork means making sacrifices. She is very used to ceding her own desires in favour of a joint endeavour. What she wants is to keep Mr. Patterson with her forever. regardless of his capacity. What they need is quite different. He is, through no fault of his own, a liability now. If it were her, he would reason through things in exactly the same way. He's always been a very practical man. She stares into the mirror. The woman looking back knows that her next kill will be her last. She'll let him believe they have something exciting to look forward to. She'll remind him that he has been her whole world and their marriage has been strengthened by their choices. Love is a verb, or so they say. There won't be any sudden movements, or black bags or shovels. Just a soft slide into darkness, as easy and painless as falling asleep. It's the best and last gift she can give him. After all, Mrs. Patterson loves Mr. Patterson.
Linz has done an amazing job with this story. I love the way this starts with a mention of body number 4, which of course drags us in from the very first sentence. But then it's all chips and peas, trips to Aldi, and watching Countdown on the telly. All very normal and domestic, nothing to see here, just an ordinary older couple doing all sorts of normal, regular things. Until they spot someone interesting and start to follow them. And you suddenly remember that body again. And then you realise that even the bodies aren't the story. Not really. Really, this is a story about a relationship. And it's not quite the relationship that it appears on the surface. There's something darker underneath, and something even darker under that. The thing that really tears at me is Mrs. Patterson's decision at the end. Because it's awful. It's callous and calculating, and I hate it. But it's also perfectly, precisely in character. You cannot imagine her, the Mrs. Patterson we've come to know through these some 3,500 words, making any other choice in that moment. Characters in horror fiction sometimes do ridiculous things. How many times have you found yourself thinking, oh, come on, she wouldn't go in there? So when a character in a story does, or in this case plans to do, the thing that we all know they shouldn't, but it feels completely plausible, that's when you know the author has absolutely nailed the characterisation. And that's craft. Wonderful work by Linz. PseudoPod is funded by you, our listeners. As always, if you can, please go to pseudopod.org and donate by clicking on Feed the Pod. If you can't afford to do that, then please consider leaving reviews of our episodes, tweeting about them, or generally making a noise on whichever form of social media is your preferred form of self-flagellation these days. Oh, and if you like merch, of course you do, and hey, maybe you should get something for your mum, Escape Artists has a Void merch store. You'll find the links at the Escape Artists website or in our pinned post on Twitter at pseudopod_org. PseudoPod is part of Escape Artists Incorporated and is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Download and listen to the episode on any device you like, but don't change it or sell it. The music is by permission of Anders Manga. At the end here, we always have a closing quote, and I immediately wanted to use the one I have ultimately decided to include, after adding it and deleting it several times. My worry is that these few lines out of context have a flavour that isn't perhaps reflective of the whole poem from which they're taken. So do take a moment to read the whole thing if you can. It's called When All the Others Were Away at Mass by Seamus Heaney. And here's the quote. I remembered her head bent towards my head, her breath in mine, our fluent dipping knives, never closer the whole rest of our lives. See you soon, folks. Take care. Stay safe.
Hi, I'm Laura Perlman, editor of Cats Cast, the monthly feline fiction podcast that actually exists. You may be familiar with the April Fool's versions of Cats Cast that have come out over the last 2 years, but this is no joke. Starting in April, we'll be putting out an episode every month for the next year at least. If you're an Escape Artist supporter on Patreon, the best way to listen to Cats Cast is on the Escape Artist Premium Content podcast feed. If you don't already have that in your podcatcher, you can find it under the My Membership tab at the EA Patreon. If you're not an EA patron, you can listen on our public feed, but we're only sharing half the episodes there. You can find more details at escapeartist.net/catscast. Now here's a preview of Episode 1, The Cat Lady and the Petitioner by Jennifer Hudak, which will go live everywhere on April 1st.
The fact that Bob can speak is strange. But now that Laurie is standing at the top of the playground structure, she begins to realize that there are far more unsettling things in the universe. The hole leading to nothing, for example, that's right behind Bob. It's not really a hole. Laurie's mind labels it as such because when faced with something which defies all description, the mind will force it to fit somewhere. Hole is as close to an analog as Laurie's mind can come up with. What it is, in fact, is a loosening. A thin place in the membrane between universes, where the fabric is worn like jeans over kneecaps, and the threads weaving everything together have begun to pull apart. Laurie could not possibly know this, but the cat lady does. Her house sits upon one of those thin places. It's been her job, through each of her 9 lives, to guard it. Hers and the cat's. A long time ago, when she was young and frisky and new, it was a dangerous place, with universes threatening to burst through at all hours. Not all universes have soft blankets and cups of tea and catnip and windowsills that warm in the sun.
It's a PseudoPod. It's a big foot.
It's all about podcasts these days.